Hello.
Hello.
Hey. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I am sunburnt. How are you?
Not that. I'm doing okay.
Uh, I was supposed to be working inside today,
Oh no.
and I ended up working outside today.
And
And
for those who may not know, you live in Dallas.
yes, and so my neck and the back of my arms right now are a little.
Oh, it's the worst.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, welcome, you guys, John and John. Nice to see both of you.
Hey, same. Good
John,
to
I
see you
haven't seen
guys.
you in a long time. It's been a while. John Piscatello, I saw you like a couple hours ago.
Yeah.
But
Yes, you did.
yeah,
I know. It's been since July, since Paris, I think.
probably,
Or
right?
maybe we had like a lesson, I think, after
That's
that.
right.
But yeah, it's been a long time.
That's a
Good to
bit
see
above it. Well, it's
you.
good to see you.
John, I loved your double concerto.
Thanks. Oh, thank you so
Yes.
much.
That was such a
I
fun little
I feel like
treat.
I was really showed up by my 16-month-old nephew, but I appreciate it. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, John. What John did was, well, you could probably explain it better than I can. I just saw this about 20 minutes ago, and I was just laughing my face off.
Oh yeah, it's I just wrote a little like parody piano concerto, but I call it a double concerto for one and a half pianos. Because basically I recorded my 16-month-old nephew just like smashing down on my keyboard. Took the MIDI and kind of created a part and then wrote this kind of like very classical sounding sonata around it, or sonata concerto around it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really fun. It was really fun
I feel like I've played
yesterday.
some forehand piano and had partners like that myself, so I get it.
Oh
Uh,
man.
very fun. Well, thank you guys for all being here. Much appreciate it. And there's a bunch of others that will not be watching it synchronously with us, but thank you guys as well whenever you watch this. So, my idea for this was kind of simple. In a lot of my teaching, as you guys all know already, I do a lot of kind of filling in the gaps that you probably should have got at school, but you didn't, through no fault of your own, just because these things are not taught clearly anymore. And the sonata form was like a no-brainer for me, right? Because it's the one thing that's been going on since the Baroque period that's still going strong in terms of forms, and still something that we still think about, talk about. The only other exception to that I could think of was theme and variations, which is a dying art. I guess it's still kind of alive. I've written a few. My teacher's written an excellent. If you guys know, you guys probably have heard Philip's variation, Bach variations for piano. Fantastic piece. Um, So, that's a little minor exception. Again, apart from that, you can really trace the kind of form and the itself like through the different eras, and by what the composers did with it, how they treated it, you learn a lot about those composers and those time periods. First of all, because the popularity of this thing was not always exponential. It wavered and went down and up and down and had down periods and up periods, and yet it's still going strong today. You know, and as we know it today, like, let's think about everything that is generally considered a sonata form, like every kind of piece. Obviously, any type of sonata for piano or solo instrument, any trio, quartet, including string quartet and string trio, quintet, sextet, all the rest of that. Every symphony, right? Every concerto. I mean, this is like bordering on half of the repertoire, maybe more, right? They're all freaking sonatas. Why? Why? You know? You guys saw my Instagram the other day. Like, Rebecca and I went to go see this fantastic concert for the orchestra. It's the first time we'd gone out to like go watch a concert that we weren't like involved with or had to because we had friends, or we just like went like normal humans to the orchestra, and it was glorious. And for whatever reason, they were really on their game this time. They did Rachmaninoff Third Concerto, followed by Bartok Concerto for Orchestra. Particular favorite of mine, and I guess most people's, right? I mean, that piece just absolutely rules. But again, both those pieces are sonatas. They couldn't be any more different from one another, right? Rachmaninoff is the classic late romantic three movement style, fast, slow, fast, right? In which he has a complete exposition, development, and recapitulation, but he does all these things to kind of hide them and play with them and mess with them a little bit so that you're never quite sure where you are. That's very late end romanticism, right? And then the Bartok, 5 movements, right? Slow, fast, slow, kind of fast. Well, and the last one's very fast, I guess. Slow, fast, fast. The movements themselves have incredibly differing lengths, right? They're not one at all the same, and yet it's still a sonata form with a complete first movement Sonata Allegro. It's kind of nuts, right? And so I just want to talk about, like, in general today, where this thing came from and like how it kind of got going. Because I think we all kind of just think that it started with Haydn or Mozart. But of course, Bach has pieces called sonatas. But I'd say I did a little bit of research on this, and I saw that in the about 1,200 catalog pieces that we know Bach wrote, only 3% were called sonata. Right? That's a very small number. It's still a lot of pieces. And none of them are for the keyboard. Right? His sonatas are always flute sonatas or violin sonatas, solo sonatas. And that right there should tell you something about how he thinks about that word, right? So back up a little bit. Like, who's the first person to start using it? I don't know if we know who the first person was, but I can guarantee you, just with the word itself, I know where it came from. It's kind of like, if you're ever to pick like one supernova event in the history of music, it has to be the evolution of the keyboard, right? Not just the organ, but the actual keyboard, the harpsichord, the continuo, right? Once that came to be, all of a sudden, music which was almost all sung before then was now not. It was played. And that's what the word means, right? Sonata comes from sonare in Latin, right? Meaning to make sound. And all music before that was cantare, right? To sing. Now, all of a sudden, you had these new composers who were like, I'm not using singers at all, but I'm making this, these exquisitely complex pieces. So I can't call this a cantata. There's no singing. So they call it a sonata, right? That's where the word comes from, which is a really elegant cutaway to do it, but also kind of funny because in Latin, like, it literally more means to scrape, as in like to be abrasive. It doesn't mean like, something pleasant. It's more kind of like obnoxious sound making. But by the time the Italians got through with the word, it meant like, any type of making sound. And so I think it's kind of a cool thing, right? To think of a cantata and a sonata as two, as identical, but just one without words. Now, the forms as we know those today of those two forms couldn't be any more different. But remember, the sonata wasn't invented by Bach either. I'm sorry, the cantata wasn't invented by Bach either, right? These things had already had 100 plus years of history. So I think it's fair to say the early adoption of this is, okay, how do we make sense out of long spans of time in music without text? Because that was always the guided principle of music beforehand, right? If you're Palestrina, you want to know how long this madrigal is going to be, just look at the text. If it's like 6 lines of text, it's probably a minute and a half, right? If it's 12 lines of text, you just do the math. Right? Because that's what the point of the idea is to get from the beginning of the text to the end, right? But now when you don't have that, you have to find some way to organize the piece, because if you just go random phrase to phrase to phrase to phrase, just like if I was to randomly just start saying random words or sentences to you, you'd think that I was having some type of mental breakdown. And you'd be right, because that's not something that we can understand. These phrases have to be organized. And they have to be organized in such a way like you would organize a speech, right? Like, I always talk about the fact that Bach writes in his letters a lot about studying rhetoric. And people are like, what the hell's rhetoric? Is that how to argue? Kinda. It's more to like how to public speak. It's how to like, it's more how to persuade people to do something, which I don't know about you. Like, I think I took like a 8th grade public speaking class, and that was like, to the kids in that class, that was just beyond the pale torture. It was like every day was like, I can't do it. I don't know. I always kind of liked it. I was like, I was comfortable with it, but I can understand why most people would just be like terrified. I get it. But, like all things with practice, like, you get used to it. It's the same thing with performance. Like I listened to this really interesting Zoom seminar thing maybe 2 weeks ago on performance anxiety as a topic, which I was like, I've always been fascinated by it because I had it when I was a kid. I don't have it anymore now. But like, how did that happen in the brain? Like, what happened there? And part of it's obvious, just confidence and stuff. But I think the main thing is just repetition, repetition, repetition. It's like, I know I'm going, I sit, I do this, and then I leave. And it's like, this is just what I do. It's the same thing in public speaking, I think. In any case, like, so how, if you were preparing a speech, would you begin? Well, you definitely start by being like, okay, what am I actually trying to persuade people of, right? That's probably the first thing you're going to talk about. Now, you might give a little intro, a little color, a little something, but the first thing you need to do is say, here's my thesis, right? And then you follow that with the proofs. Now, if you've ever studied debate or any of these things, they usually tell you like, if you get like 3 minutes or something, you probably don't want to hit more than like two topics, like because people can't keep more than that in their brain. But I would say even earlier, like it's the early composers, they don't have two topics; they have just one. And the difference between the Baroque sonata and the classical, we're going to start with the Baroque today, is that they do not have two competing ideas, right? It's just one idea. But that idea itself has to be developed and then restated at the end, just like a speech, right? It's got to be presented, explained, presented again, out. And that is sonata form in a nutshell, right? Now, in the Baroque, that will not be called exposition, development, recapitulation. They won't get any of those words until later. Probably CPE Bach was one of the first to start with that. I always think poor CPE. And by the way, you guys, feel free to jump in if I get your questions or anything at any time. I tend to talk and talk because I like the sound of my own voice. But CPE, I always imagine if you're Bach, I don't have any children. I know, John, you have children. I don't know if other John, you have children. But, so I have no personal experience of this. But I can imagine you're Bach, and you have this son who's a great talent, and he brings up, and he's a great composer, and you want to be so proud of him. And then he starts writing in the style of the classical composers, and you're just like, no! It would be like if I had a kid and he started like, a punk band. I'd be like, oh, of course he did. Like, you know, how could this have gone any other way? Because CPE, was a very early adopter of the sonata. If you guys ever, any of you guys ever heard his Magnificat? Such a pretty interesting piece of
I
music.
think so.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting piece of music. But what blows my mind about it is, first of all, you're writing Magnificat, and your dad wrote the Magnificat, so okay, no pressure. But Dad Bach did hear the piece performed before he died, like I think 2 years, and there are some quotes which are rather touching, like from the two pieces. But you know what Bach's style sounds like, and the beginning of the Magnificat starts just with the cellos going. And Bach has been like, for Christ's sake, like, you know. That actually brings me to one more thing, because I think this is all important kind of background stuff to understand how this came about. I had a student at EMA like 20 years ago who came up to me in the class, hallway one day and was like, Dr. Boyle, you know who killed music? And I was like, oh God, I can't wait for you to tell me. Was it Schoenberg? Was it, pick one? And he's like, Caccini. And I was like, Caccini? Like random early Italian Baroque composer? Caccini. He ruined it? He was like, yep. And I was like, explain. He was like, well, he was the first person to have accompaniments that just sounded like this. And then you could have a singer on top do whatever you like. And yeah, that's kind of true, actually. I was like, this is not as dumb as ideas I ever, I thought it was. Because he was he's not the first, but he was one of the first to be educated as a contrapuntist, but then come to the understanding or the idea that, you know what, like all the lines don't have to be equal, right? Like Bach thinks they have to be equal, whatever. He's old and stodgy. Like, what if they aren't all equal? What if there's one that's like the dominant line and everybody else is like subservient, right? I don't know. Neither of you guys were in or any of you guys were in my Chopin class that we just finished up. But we talked a great deal in Chopin's writing of like his early stuff, where the left hands are doing stuff like this, right? And then you can have 20 over whatever, the famous Chopin stuff. When you get later into Chopin's life, the left hand is now not this static thing anymore. It's all contrapuntally activated. Everybody's moving at all times. And what do you lose? You lose the 23s over 7 because all the voices are now more equal. So you can't have that, right? And you look at the second to last nocturne, it's brilliant. It starts with a fully contrapuntal texture, and it gets like sparser and sparser, and then it gets into finally chords, and then you have a 27 over whatever. It's like, yeah, that guy freaking knew what he was doing, man, right? So I say all this because you need background here. Like, let's go back to the speech analogy for a second. If you want your point to be understood, you need to repeat it, but not just like repeat it, like explain it, right? And so you have to first have an expository statement, and then you have to have music afterwards that reflects on it, that won't be as memorable perhaps as the actual statement itself. And this starts to break us into the binary form that we're going to get to, if you think about it this way, right? I think a lot of the problem with a lot of the music written today, especially in the classical world, is like it's all exposition. Exposition, exposition, exposition. It's like the TV is like this too. It's like nonstop, nonstop, nonstop. Go, don't look away, don't look away. That's very tiring and taxing. And I know, we live in the age of TikTok, so I'm probably like, super backwards on this. But I would say that, there's a deeper experience to be had by presenting something and say, okay, this is what I want you to pay attention to right here. And then taking the time to develop and explain it, right? And you can kind of see how quickly like the percentages amount of time of those are gonna fluctuate, right? Like in the Baroque, you're gonna see like an 8-bar presentation, maybe an 8-bar response, and you're gonna do it again, right? Or you have a slightly secondary passage, still with the same idea, and then you're gonna go back and do the original one again. Remember, in the Baroque, we don't have this 1-5-1 crap yet. That's going to be like the defining Schenkerian feature of the classical period, right? We don't have this key relationship thing because in the Baroque, we don't really modulate. If we modulate, we're going to go somewhere close by, and then we're going to come back, right? And the reason for that is very simple. Like, we didn't have perfect tuning yet. We didn't have even mean tune yet, right? So the well-tempered is not our system, but it's like 99% of our system, right? So only by then were composers starting to think like, maybe I can explore some different keys, right? So of course they're going to naturally go one flat down or one sharp up. But the idea of like centering an entire piece around that didn't come about until the classical era. So I have an example for you from Bach, from the Well-Tempered, of a piece that is clearly a sonata, or like I like to kind of call in my own terminology a proto-sonata. It's a sonata in all but name. And it's only going to have one idea and one theme. Okay, so this is the F major from book 2. By the way, any questions so far, you guys? I know I go fast. Sweet. Feel free to jump in at any time and interrupt me. Okay, here's the opening. Okay. And there's our first large chunk of music, to our first cadence, right? Okay. Now, we started in Fa, we ended in Do, right, with a clear cadence in Do. You had an expository passage, which was really just these 4 bars, and because all of this is new and unpredictable. first move he makes, you can tell this is book 2, is from F major to F minor. That does not happen in book 1, right? And you think you're going to end in minor, right? But no. See this little D natural right here? That guy does a lot of heavy lifting. And we're off and modulating. All right. That little guy right there deserves the tenuto at the very least. Right? If that was D flat, we'd still be in minor, right? Let me just play it for you. Right? But instead, right? Okay. What follows? Sequences. And that's not atypical in Bach, right? To start with an expository passage and go with sequences. Sure, absolutely. And you can kind of track those sequences pretty cleanly, right? You kind of look from measure to measure here, from sol to do to fa to si, up by fourths, right? Okay, and now here in this measure, I think is where you have the first choice of what is this form going to be, right? Because if I turn it back around to the beginning right now, I might have an invention. A complicated one, but an invention, right? If I cadence here in the in the dominant, I might have like a dance theme. This could be like a bourrée. More on dance themes, dance moves later. I had a great idea a few years ago for a video game. I told Rebecca, she's like, don't talk about that ever again. So you know how there's like Dance Dance Revolution? I was like, can we do like like Baroque Dance Revolution? Like, wouldn't that be awesome? You have to like, do a bourrée. Anyway, no one would probably buy it. But this is the moment, right? So expository 4 measures of development and modulation, right? Still using the same 4 notes in every single beat. And then what happens here? Sorry, excuse me. I love misdoubled 1 chords as a harmonist. So that's so good. You know you're going to do, but he doubles it incorrectly here. And so there's just this little moment of what? Because he knows that the 5th voice is going to pick it up here. And now the full-on cadence. Okay, and that's a completed exposition of sorts, right? You made your argument, you developed it, you got to a height, you made the modulation, beautiful cadence, good stuff, all good. Perfect authentic cadence, everybody's happy. Okay, now what happens next? If this were just a kind of normal rounded binary, we go into a B section, right? What happens next? Let's find out.
Real quick, Dr. Boyle.
Sure.
So just then I have this right. 1 through 4 is the exposition.
Yep.
5 to 9 is sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And then from 10 to 16 is development.
I'd call it like I wouldn't call it, well, it is development, largely speaking, largely raw, but it's kind of like going back to the beginning and showing us the theme one more time, right?
Gotcha.
And it might not sound like that, but look at these 8th notes up here.
Yeah.
That's this, right? It doesn't hit you because he's in D minor when he starts it, right? Let me just play these 2 measures. So the first measure, and now here, measure whatever it is. I should have wrote measure numbers. That's actually the opening theme again. But just beautifully kind of hidden in this kind of modulation. By the way, I do a contrapuntal analysis of this piece that really freaking is awesome. But I'm resisting my urge to do that today because we have so much to talk about with Sonata. But from a contrapuntal motive point of view, this piece, man, so much to talk about. You could probably already guess that it's the rest and this 4-note curl. Right? In any case. All right, so what happens next? Oh, sorry. Let me wrap up, Matt, your question. Like exposition, yes. Development and sequence modulation, yes. Then a kind of restatement in the new key and a lock off of it. So that in itself is a kind of ABA little passage. Okay.
Yeah.
So next, either we get a B section or let's find out. Maybe right here it's starting to really hit you. I've heard this before. That's the opening theme again. Now in the dominant. Now he hides it so beautifully because there's a fake entry. This is top peak Bach, and that's when I say that I mean business. Like you hear this and you think this is the beginning of the new line, right? Nah, it's a fake out. This is the beginning of the new line. And if you follow this measure and we kind of look back to the beginning, look at this measure, look at the beginning. A little bit different, right? Okay, look at the next measure. Look here. Oh, that's the same. And then here and here. Same here and here. It's a transposition, right? Down a fourth in Do. This is what makes this a sonata, right? Because we're restating this before we move on. So we're doing it, in this case, what we call double exposition. And you can kind of keep playing what measure goes to what measure until you see the difference, right? This is this. This is that, this is that, this is that. A little hard to see, but this right here is that measure. Here, I just lost my place. Right here is where it changes, right? This measure is the same as this one. So what changes? Let's find out. D minor? Let's find out. You track right there that D minor chord. Remember I pointed out the weak C major before? Right. Oh, where did you go? Yeah, right here. We're now right there, that same position. This weak D minor chord. We're a step higher. So, okay. That didn't go where you might have thought it might have gone, right? There's a lot of major and minor mix-ups in this piece, and I'm here for it. But that's the same number of measures, 16, as the beginning, plus 1, the fake-out measure, right? So this really cool form of 16, here's the structural downbeat, but there's a fake-out measure, then 16 more. And there's a crafty little modulation. It happens right here, the measure that's different. Because if you play this measure, we're screaming towards staying in Do, right? All right, we're gonna be in Do. But then see that little B flat? Nice courtesy accidental. And see the E flat? Now you're thinking, oh, hey, we're going to wrap it up back in the home key. And we'll make a little kind of like closed loop of like F going to C, C going to F. And that, if you had just done that, you have a binary piece. You have a dance suite form, like an allemande, right? But he doesn't do that. He does something way out of the blue and modulates, remember, from C to D minor. And just leaves it hanging, too. I mean, look at this half cadence. Whew, man, that's good stuff. And we start here in an extremely weak D minor. Sorry. Okay, creepy music that's in the wrong key, longer phrases. Does this scream anything to you? Yeah, development, right? If you had to describe the development of a romantic sonata, what would you say? Right? Longer phrases, strange keys, quick modulations, moving all around, eventually to set up the ginormous reveal of the recapitulation. Well, that's exactly what he's about to do. This super creepy start in D minor doesn't even last long. We can't even get four measures till we've already modulated. One other thing that you'll see in romantic developments is epic sequences. I think in the Schumann First Symphony, not his greatest piece, admittedly, he's got like a 25 measure sequence. And it's just like, Jesus, like, I could take a nap before that sequence rolls through again. Anyway, so we're going to see that. I'll pick it up from here. Here's the sequence. Look at that. That's another one of those great who wrote this. Okay, we're still in the development, although he would never have called it that, right? And you see the big, glorious, long sequences, right? Up by thirds, which is a very cool and unusual sequence, up by thirds. More on that another day. And it's through sequencing that you get some of the most unique sounds in music, right? Like, how the hell did we get that? Or that? It's because we had this, which feels totally normal, right? But once it's up a third, all of a sudden the half steps and the whole steps are in different places, and you get those incredible dissonances, right? This, not that unusual, right? But up a third, and then up a third again over here. It's good
I
stuff.
have another quick question.
Sure.
On our spooky D minor section,
Yeah.
that doesn't even last four measures.
Yeah.
The Do you have a theory as to what did he go to that D minor because he's following the sequence, or is there some, because like why would you include, like I feel like including something like this without it fitting into like at least a 4 bar phrase seems a little
Yeah.
suspicious to me.
I'm 100% with you. This is very unusual. The move itself to D minor is not in any of the textbooks. Like, that's a strange move right there and unexpected because this whole piece has been in major so far, right up until that
Right.
moment. And he extends and changes the structure here to get there. But then the beauty of Bach is that he finally did all the hard work to get there and then he just left it immediately and moved on. It's good stuff. I mean, there's a psychological, effect of that, right? I can show you a lot of examples in Bach where he does this. He spends all this time getting somewhere, and then immediately, as soon as he gets there, it's just like, boop, now we're moving somewhere else. He very rarely kind of languishes in an arrival. He's always on the way to something else. So, okay, you get that. And by the way, like if you track the thirds in this piece, it should be pretty clear where the thirds are coming from, right? Like,
Yeah.
again, I'm not doing the contrapuntal analysis today, but like if I just played the downbeats, like the strong beats, I'm sorry, you'd get this. That's an entire scale in thirds. So that's hence all the third motion in this piece. That's contrapuntal and meta contrapuntal stuff that I could talk about another time. That explains the third sequences up. Okay, so here we are. Let's see how he finishes up the Don't Call It the Development. I'm starting right here. brain should be thinking Neapolitan, and that means we're at the end of this phrase. He never goes beyond the Neapolitan. We're not going to really end in A minor. Whoa! Okay, I'm not even going to play the next note because that was a full-on modulation to A major. Now, it was supposed to be A minor, but you got the pickety at the last second. Okay, so we started at an F, we went to D, and we went to A, right? It's all thirds. Thirds one direction, thirds in the other direction. You might be wondering, how the hell is he going to get out of this one? Because A major and F major are not closely related. And he does it in one fell swoop. That is a remarkable passage of music, I gotta say. Even for late Bach, that is a move. Like you were saying before, Matt, right? Full on, all this churning and churning and churning to get to A minor. Well, first surprise, it's A major, and then the little motive brings us back home, and boom, we hit it again. This is the moment of recapitulation in a sonata, right? In early sonata writing, it was the point, right? All this argumentation and all the sequencing and the development, the point was to get to here, not to get to the end. It's the problem that the romantic composers are going to have to worry about later. If the point of the sonata is to get to here, why do I keep going? Well, we'll get to that later. But it's a shocker right here, right? And notice that all these pitches are left hanging. And then he picks them all up in turn. And that makes you go back and hear the beginning again and be like, I was so nice and cheery, and now I'm like, I don't know. There was something creepy going on in there the whole time, wasn't there? That's so good. It makes you recontextualize that you heard something once and you heard it again and you're like, God, I don't feel the same way about that at all. It's the exact same notes. I mean, that measure is verbatim the opening. So why does this feel happy and cheery? And the other one felt like, well, because you've been changed. Your opinion has been changed. And that is the whole point of the sonata, is to make you change your mind, right? Now, how do we end this thing? Well, we're not going to end in the dominant, right? So we can't just repeat. So, because remember, the 16 bars at the beginning led us to the dominant. So there's going to have to be somewhere where he breaks it off. Let's follow from here, and you'll probably hear immediately where it's different. Ah, that's different. Okay, and you can already tell how this is going to work, right? Bach doesn't, it's very rare that he ever repeats a chord, you know, like from measure to measure, like when you should have, when I should say that when the expectation is moving to the next one. So this measure sticks out like a sore thumb to me, right? It's a repeat here. And I'm still on G minor. That's a red flag. Like, that's the change. Here's what's clever about it. This will take a little bit of math work, but you guys are smart. If you're starting in 1 and you want to modulate to 5, okay. In the return, you don't want to modulate to 5. So what do? You modulate to 4 and then repeat, because that'll get you to be back on 1 at the end. Right? Does that make sense? 1 is to 5 as 4 is to 1, right? And so classic move is to find the 5 of 4, which is right here, B flat, right? The 5 of B flat. And if we manage to land on that 5 of B flat, we can then transpose everything that we did back here, and you won't have to write it twice. So where was that before? It was right here, right? There's the G minor, and he sequences it here, right? But this time he cuts it off right there, skips all of this, right? And gets all the way over to here. It's a brilliant move, right? Because compare it to this measure right here. Right? That flirts with B flat, with that E flat hanging out there, right? But never really does anything with it, right? He's still back in the home key. So it was there the first time. The second time, he goes full for it. Even pushing towards E flat, 4 of 4 of 4. That makes sense? Now all this is just repeated, transposed back up to its should have been original key of Fa. Okay, that's the end of the little B part, right? This is where he sneaks in the original idea again. This is all just repeated. Now, I mean, I've been singing this praises of this piece, and I'm not going to stop because if you guys have all written a lot of music. If I write something in key X and then I take it down a fourth, is it going to still sound the same? Maybe. If it's on the conservative side of the ledger, it probably will. But I've had many times singers ask me, "Oh, can I transpose your songs up a step or down a step?" And sometimes I'm like, "No, no, you can't." You know, because the piano writing is too intense, it's too complicated, and it has to be in this key for it to sound as effective as it can be. Like some of my like more simpler songs, yeah, you could transpose those a half step or a whole step maybe because you're not using up all the piano and it kind of stays close to the middle. Maybe that's okay, but when you're really using the instrument, transposition, especially by fourth, is like that's a long way away. And Bach, not all pieces of the Well Tempered were written in the key that they ended up in, but there's no doubt this one was because he knew he could get that low C, which is the lowest note on the keyboard in Bach's time, right at the end, and it would just be freaking glorious, right? But you have to write this knowing up here, all the way back to here, that you could do this. Now, there's a little bit of finagling, just a tiny bit. But like, look at this measure closely, right? Look at the bass line. Okay, then we look at the penultimate measure down here. He fudges it a little bit, right? That measure's not the same because he's ran out of room, right? This pitch would have been off the keyboard. So he's also very practical in the sense of like, I've always loved this about Bach. He knows when to like hold firm to like, I'm repeating this verbatim. And when he's like, nah, nobody's going to notice, man. I'm just going to change it. And it works perfectly. You, first of all, have no idea that something was changed, but you remember that you heard this music before. And now it's like so much more satisfying because it's at the very bottom of the instrument. So that's my kind of like basic take on proto sonatas, like sonatas before two themes change the whole, party. Because you have to understand this before we're going to look at Mozart next week. And if I just start off by saying there are two themes, you'd be like, what? Why? Well, because that's the expansion of this, where people said like, okay, how can I take this form and like stretch it larger and larger? Well, eventually I'm going to need like contrasting material, but not yet, right? This excuse me, this prelude's long for a Bach prelude. It's probably like 3.5 minutes, depending on your pianist, which might not seem long, but it's long for a Bach prelude. You still got a fugue to go after this, so at least it's fast. But I wanted you to see this uneven form. So let's like kind of recap big stuff. 16 bar exposition, 16 bar plus that one extra little guy, double exposition, right? Then a much longer, we're not calling it development, but it is development section, a glorious recapitulation that we didn't see coming at all, and then a recap of the whole thing without the modulation, or with like counter modulation to stay in the whole thing. I mean, that's a sonata, right? Like to me, it's recognizable, and it's interesting that like developments have that feel of like I'm in the wrong key, I'm moving to different places, I have the long sequences. How did Bach like? There's not much precedent for this. Like I go and look at the pieces like by his contemporaries. What's his nuts? Why am I blanking? Vivaldi, right? Vivaldi didn't write a ton of sonatas, but he wrote a bunch. They're almost all continuo and string pieces, right? And they also start to take on this kind of, usually chipper kind of little opening and then a little spookier development and then come back around for the big, triumphant ending. So whether it's like Bach came up with it, I'm not going to go there. I don't know if he did, but he definitely refined it, you know? Because, of course, as you guys know, the only thing that all composers in all of history can agree on is Bach. Yeah, it's the only one, right? Every composer has the well-tempered clavier. If you polled people on like, do you think Mozart's important or Beethoven's important? You'd get some dum-dums that'll be like, oh, it's overrated. It's not, but you get some people out there, you know. But if you said that Bach was overrated, I would just not talk to you or listen to you because you'd be wrong, you know. I mean, universally held beliefs, they're rare, so it's good to hold on to them.
You've made some interesting comments about Beethoven,
Oh, I know. I have poo-pooed Beethoven a little bit. Look, Beethoven is not my composer, but I've stolen a ton from him and I've learned a ton from him. I just like I don't put on Beethoven for pleasure very often. It's not my music. But I also don't put on Mozart for pleasure very often either. Classical era is probably my least. It's the one I'm least interested in. But again, it's called classical for a reason. If you don't know it, then you don't know it. You can't understand everything that came after it. You know, like I think if we're going to make a popularity curve for sonata, baroque, it starts pretty low. Like people are kind of interested in it but fooling around, right? It goes super red hot in the classical era. Everybody's doing it, everything's a sonata. It goes back down like early romantics like Liszt, Chopin, and Schumann. Goes kind of back down. They do it. Chopin only wrote 3 piano sonatas, right? And one of them was a childhood piece. The other two are freaking awesome. But why didn't he write, 33 like Beethoven? Because we're going down. We kind of get tired of it. Then there's the counter reaction again into Brahms and company, where in Germany during Brahms time, we're going to get to this. If you didn't break through with a symphony, well, you were just not good, And so you better master that sonata form, guys, you know. And then again, after him, a little bit of a lull in the kind of impressionistic period, but it never went away after that, because of course then you get Mahler and then you get Strauss and you get all the rest. And obviously it's still going on today. That's why we're talking about it. So that's kind of the ups and downs historically. I think people gravitated to it in the classical era so much. I mean, you could read all the books by like Charles Rosen and even Schenker himself and say, well, it was the Enlightenment and then all this stuff just made sense. And it's like, I've always found that like a little wanting as an explanation. Like, people aren't going to copy other composers unless what they hear something that they know is going to work, right? And so this idea of to pull it all back around to the beginning, right? We don't have text anymore. This isn't a religious experience, or even a secular one with text. So how can I like import meaning and message through just sounding and not singing? And it caught on so quickly, I think, because people were like, wow, this is a form that everybody can recognize like fast. Like the average idiot out there is like, oh my God, I heard the return of the theme. That doesn't happen in complicated fugues or in Baroque dances. Nothing wrong with writing in those styles. I love it all. But you know what I mean? You don't get those like aha moment of like, oh my God, yeah, I remember that. Like, a fugue is a fugue. It goes from where it goes and it goes to the end and it's done, right? It's not about returns, right? And so, I don't know. There's something very human, I think, about the sonata form. It's like comforting in a way to our dumb, brains, meat brains. Anyhow, that's just what I had to show for you guys tonight. Any questions or thoughts or comments or anything?
Uh, just a quick thought. Can
Yeah.
you hear me all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I feel like most of my life, the sonata form, I've like known about it, but just like academically because I've
Right.
studied piano. And
Yep.
so at this point in my life, I'm finally starting to recognize it just kind of by ear and appreciating, just like you said, it makes me feel smart,
Yeah.
even though I'm not.
I hear you.
I'll be like, oh, and I in this journey, and it's so satisfying. It makes me think a lot about Dr. Lasser said before about like keeping the audience on the edge of a very comfortable seat,
Yeah.
because while the composer can do what they want as a composer, whatever, they're still using the same form. And so that's so exciting to me and beautiful
Hmm.
because I can really appreciate the difference in these composers' brains, right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
just I find it so nerdily exciting to be like, oh wow, it is the recapitulation, but it's a different theme, and that
Mhm.
I yeah, it's just a lovely thing. So
Yeah, you're 100% on the money with it. We're gonna go into great details as we get down into the future, especially as we get towards the Debussy one, about like how this superstructure is so strong that you can build on top of it in all these different ways, right? You can like build it up into these massive Mullerian, type of structures, or you can like Debussy pin it down to it just it's like barely hanging on to being a sonata at all. And I think that's just a testament to how like I don't know easily appreciable the form is, you know.
is
Um,
that kind of what you were talking about with like in rhetoric? If you got 2 minutes to speak, you're not going to present 40 ideas. You're going to like talk
Absolutely.
about one thing. So it's that's kind of
I
what
think that's exactly right, and I
you're
think
talking about, right?
definitely. I every once in a while, some smart student of mine says like, "You always look at all the great pieces. Like, why don't you look at a bad one and like talk about why it's bad?" And I was like, "Well, first of all, there's the negativity thing, and second of all, like I don't want it to get into my opinions. I try to keep everything factual. I don't love all the music I talk about. I do love most of it, but you know, I could go into composers that I don't really care for, and I get to show you why I think that the sonata form is kind of like either disabused or like um, it's kind of been a letdown. I'll just give you one piece because it's a young piece by a composer everybody knows. Go and look at the Bruckner First Symphony, right? It's not a piece that I recommend, except to show that what happens when somebody doesn't know how to deal with the form and it just topples over and kind of collapses. He doesn't build the foundations of the structure in that piece, and by the end of it, I'm left feeling like, what just happened? Now he would later get it together and become, obviously, he's not my composer, so I don't want to pick on him, and he was like a freaking 18-year-old when he wrote it, so give him a pass on that one. But it's an example if you I don't know if I'm not recommending you actually go look at it, but I'm just saying I could show you some examples where I'm not sure the form holds up that well.
It's funny because I recently finished reading this biography on Brahms that actually Matthew had recommended to me, the young,
Yeah, nice.
and it was so funny to read about how Brahms was so critical about Bruckner and just like hated him. I think
Yeah,
eventually at the end of their life, at the end of his life, they were kind of like on okay terms, but like he, it must have been that
yeah,
like for the sonata form before he handled larger, ensembles, whatever. And
yep,
Bruckner was just like, let's do this, and just
yeah,
jumped right into it. And I'm sure he was like, you idiot.
yeah. They had like completely opposite personalities. Brahms is like reserved. He's very emotional with his like close friends and people, but like to everybody else, he's like professional, professional, professional. And like what he hated above all things was people without craft. And now that might not be a nice thing to say today, but like back then, this was stuff that people said all the time. He's like, that person has no talent. They have no craft. Like, yeah, I mean, it's Brahms talking. Nobody has more craft than him except probably Bach. So I get it. But I think they did eventually like at least shake hands when they were older, I think, but they didn't like each other. I mean, let's be honest, Brahms kind of didn't like anybody. I mean, he hated Wagner, obviously. He was right, famously. There's a story that he went into, especially when he got older and he got really weird. he went into some party in Vienna, and like everybody's like, "Oh, hey, Dr. Brahms," and he's like ignoring everybody. He goes to like the piano cabinet and just starts like throwing scores out until he finds one of Wagner, and he says, "See this? I will not play here." Out. Like, salute you, sir.
There was, and I think this is in the book, and correct me, John, since you have read it more recently than I. The like after Brahms passed away, they actually found a Wagner score
Oh
in
yeah,
his. So it's kind of like the I was talking with a friend I went and saw De Valkyrie with, and I
yeah.
talked about like just like how cheeky it was that
Hmm.
like after Brahms died, he actually had Wagner in his own cabinet.
Yeah, of course he did. Because he was smart enough to know, like, you have to know what you're fighting against. Like, you can't just be taking swings out there. Like, you need to study the scores. And, like, I mean, look, if you came over to my house and saw my scores over here, um, I have a ton of scores of music that I really don't like. Like, for example, I could just throw one out. I have the score of John Adams', what is it, Short Ride on a Fast Machine? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Now, I don't like that piece,
Yeah.
but man, does that piece freaking work. And I want to know why, and I want to know what he's doing in there. I do not like it at all, just personal tastes. But I still want that score. I figure out what he's doing in there.
Is there something I think about, especially with going back to the dumb people can understand sonata,
Hmm.
uh, the that kind of premise is another facet of that because the music itself is so naked in terms of it's piano and another instrument,
Mm.
maybe.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, right? Is that we can have much more melodic kind of, on the surface type of stuff, whereas in choir, it's a little bit harder to do that traditionally. That's part of it for sure. But I think it's kind of the clear ABA, like everything is structured like this, right? The A section itself was ABA. The whole piece is ABA. It's just little, like these. There's a saying like "as above, so below," that kind of thing. Like when you look at form, you have to look at it from macro to normal to micro, everything like that, and they should all be the same. At least they are in the original conception. Now, you could push and pull on that, and we're going to see people do that, especially when we get to Beethoven, where he's like a big time pusher and puller on that. But then, like, how far can you push and pull? Well, that depends on your skill. You know, like to me, there's a series of composers, and again, we don't need to name any more names. That I think maybe like tried a little too hard and pushed it a little too far. Right? There are some that didn't push it hard enough, in all honesty, and there are some that just kind of went off and ignored it. And was just like, you know what? Who cares? Sonata, it's old fashioned, it's dumb. I'm done with that. I'll do something else. You know. So everybody reacts to it in different ways. But obviously, if it weren't so effective, that we wouldn't have such reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great hanging out with you guys, and thanks to everybody else who's watching later. Much appreciated. We'll be back next week with Mozart, which will be fun. And as always, you guys, if you have any like thoughts or questions during the week, just shoot me a quick email or something. I'll get back to you. Thanks again for
Gosh, that's
signing up
lovely.
for this and being here.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
so excited.
Thanks,
Thanks very
Dr.
Yeah.
Boyle.
much.
Yep.
See ya.
Good night.